Chapter 30. Don't you think sending any type of message is risky? Areti asked as the ship decanted from hyperspace on the outward rim of the Ambrian system. I will have to boost the signal strength from this position, but it's RF already. The Empire does not monitor those frequencies. N'dali conveyed through her comlink, her mind tethered to the draping network of cables in the ship's aft cargo hold. Hold position here for a moment, please. I will need to reroute power for the communication, so stand ready. From her seat in the Gozanti's cockpit, Areti could only shrug as various light-emitting controls flashed to darkness before her. Why didn't the Empire monitor radio frequencies anymore? She considered absently, laughing slightly at the thought. Not my problem, she said aloud. What? N'dali returned. Nothing. I'm just thinking out loud, Areti responded, rubbing her hands together as the chill of space began seeping into the cockpit. Already there is a staggering amount of activity on and around Ambria. Executor, Relentless, Temple Garden? Sighed, and a small contingent of his fleet are there. I do not recognize any of the ships they are contending with, N'dali sputtered, with little context for Areti to follow. Relentless, Areti said, a mental practice to focus her mind on a particular train of thought. Grand Admiral Hysova Tethys. Her fleet has been converging upon distal threats from corners of the outer rim for months. She is aggressive without reserve, serves order primarily, and is quick to action. Areti was sure her astute assessment was accurate as she focused on Temple Garden. I do not recognize the third name, N'dali. Running signal trace. Analysis. Processing. Temple Garden was, a Mon Calamari luxury cruise liner. Her current version is an oscillating prototype heavy battleship, N'dali conveyed, her voice systematic and machine-like. Oscillating prototype? Areti asked, rubbing her hands across her shoulders and chest. Cumulative energy appropriation and subsequent concentrated discharge. Interesting. Areti wasn't sure if interesting was the correct word, but her immediate surroundings and encroaching cold skewed her perspective. Messages relayed. 3 Star Destroyers are circumventing the planet and will converge on the Temple Garden's rear in seconds. Hold, please, N'dali continued in an eerie voice. Hold, please, seemed ridiculous to Areti as she considered her fate entirely outside of her control. The continuing thoughts floating unchecked in the back of her mind concerning the myriad levels of treason she was willingly conducting made her snort with ill-timed laughter. I fail to see the humor in this, N'dali said, her voice returning to her own. I was just thinking through the ramifications of my decision-making processes recently. Even if there were a path back, I am certain I wouldn't take it, Areti said, slapping her hands vigorously on her legs and knees to wake them up. Is there any chance we can get some heat back in here, N'dali? The power returned to her control before the slim fog of her breath dissipated fully. Of course, N'dali said. Please take us to the coordinates I have displayed on your navicomputer. I will bring us to Challenger's position. Challenger? Areti asked with a slight tinge of confusion. A friend, Areti. The commander has taken a position away from the action, but much deeper in the system. I know the ship. My question only concerns it and my unfamiliarity with the others, Areti said as her mind raced. The Empire is not engaging the rebellion? It was N'dali's turn to find humor in the situation as she chuckled over the comm. Areti, the rebellion isn't confined to a specific fleet, person, or even idea, but rather the whole of the galaxy's exception to a singular method of control or a singular power. N'dali took time to inflect the statement with her version of emotion, creating an awkwardness between words that Areti found more convincing than she had expected. I have heard that we have no idea what we are against, Areti. A statement that imparts nothing but an avenue for imagination. She paused briefly before continuing. I pose the opposite, Areti. I pose that the Empire has no idea what it is up against. In truth, because we do not even know our numbers. Whispers of battles that became legend or myth before word of them even had a chance to span the galaxy. Areti considered what she heard as she closed her eyes, mirroring this conversation to the swirling thoughts of reminiscence. Her mind's eye flashed several images from her memory of Walker Audenhoen tugging at his chin, scratching at his temple in frustration or slamming his fist into his desk. Endless data files containing after-action reports, all of which support the concept of Imperial victory after victory. All the promotions enacted over her years celebrated individuals that exemplified Imperial initiatives. There was rarely any mention of defeat, loss, or misdeeds, even more recently with the wake of desertion on the rise after the destruction of the mobile battle station. DS-1, Areti said in a whisper she hadn't committed to. And now you're starting to understand, N'dali said coolly through the ship's comm. Areti flared her eyes open. Protocol 17, she said suddenly, motioning to leave the pilot's seat. The harness she still had strapped around her body had other ideas. Specifically, Directive 21A, N'dali responded, detailing the Shalactan's Epiphany. Despite the aggressive exterior of the Order through the minds of those the Empire has brainwashed, it is an admission to the remainder of the galaxy, an admission of weakness and loss of control. The Imperial war machine is turning out more weapons than it ever has, building naval vessels faster than they are losing them. But that isn't a point they can convey to the masses. N'dali paused again, unsure if feeding Areti more information was a wise decision, given the age of their relationship. She had a thought as she weighed any consequence she could imagine. How much do you want to know, Areti Sigurn? Areti was silent in the cockpit of the Gozanti freighter, letting the question fuel her imagination and anxiety. The acquisition of knowledge brings with it both the responsibility to utilize it and the burden of knowing it, she said, staring at the stars ahead of her. Walker used to say that a long time ago. Audenhoen is wise, Areti, as are you. Areti felt a tear form in the corner of her eye. I want to know everything, N'dali. We cannot maneuver in time, Captain, and Relentless is too far below us, Tam all but screamed at his captain. Lucidity it is then, Freebo, you heard Shala, Nock returned without betraying the annoyance brewing over his lack of practical options. All hands prepare for oscillation discharge. Energy shield retraction on my mark. He looked toward the Celestin, who always had a worried expression. Light, get us out of here when discharge finalizes. You don't have to tell me twice, Captain, Light fired quickly with a look toward his navicomputer display screen. The continuing barrage from the converging Star Destroyers rang through the command deck, adding to the whirring pitch of the oscillators as they consumed the lethal energy within. Open forward doors, Nock shouted, in contention with the building hum of the concentrating energy. A heavy clang thudded through the vessel's framework as illumination across the bridge flickered slightly from the activation of the oscillation mechanism and the layers of magnetic ray shielding designed to ensure the ship's integrity. A mechanical roar drowned out all other sounds as the forward door mechanism accelerated through its ranges to a halt with a frame-shuttering thud at maximum exposure, causing a deafening metallic bang and final clank to punctuate the inevitable. On your mark, Captain, Tam shouted with a wavering hand over the deactivation switch for the ship's energy shield. All hands prepare for incoming fire, Nock shouted without need, the command deck registering an eerie silence following the cacophony of noise. Open a channel to Executor. Freebo turned to him with a dour expression, his upper lips coated in saliva. Open, sir. Executor, this is Temple Garden. Checking out, Nock said with a smile. Mark! Freebo dropped his hand without thinking as incoming turbolaser fire bombarded the vessel from all angles, violently rocking the ship with a cadence of spasms and lurches, nearly shaking the Deveronian from his perch. Several ducting sections loosed themselves from stanchions above them as they crashed into consoles and brought torrents of wire with them. Wildly sparking data centers and monitoring equipment began to flare with chaotic incendiary reports as screens smashed and technicians were rocked from their feet. The chaos lasted only a few seconds before Nock screamed again. Fire! There was no wavering hesitancy or flare of indecision as the forward viewport was filled with a blinding green light. Everyone brought their hands up, ducked behind console banks, or placed data pads before them as the intensity of the encroaching light threatened to steal every ounce of vision they possessed. Just as quickly as it had flooded them, it receded as the state of silence was vacated by a thundering roar that caused hands to switch from eyes to ears. Nock himself fell from his seat with a knee planted on the decking below him. The roar grew unbearable as the ship began to vibrate with an intensity none had expected. For a moment, Nock was certain he had just brought doom upon thousands of his compatriots before the light receded completely. The sound died to a high-pitched ringing in everyone's ears, and the bone-jarring vibrations ceased completely. Everyone that could fixated their gazes upon the brilliant white circle of destruction that had been the Star Destroyer Lucidity. "Light, get us the hell out of here," Nock shouted, after he had diverted his attention from their cataclysmic results. Yes, sir," the helmsman stammered, his arms already sweeping around the drive yoke as he slammed it forward, transforming the view from awe-inspiring destruction to the swirling whites and blues of hyperspace. "TIE formation, Captain," Hung's tactical officer intoned. Walker Audenhoen focused his attention forward as Tagada TIE ended its hyperspace travel with his skewed vision of Ambria snapping into view. He watched with curious interest as the view canted starboard and the upper deck of the Bruchal entered view. He got up from his seat and approached the viewport, noting the aligning position of Harrell. Nothing was cryptic in the formation title itself, he thought to himself, as the 3 Star Destroyers configured themselves into a point defensive formation, resembling a TIE fighter. Both Acclamator-class vessels acted as the solar wings, proficiently utilizing their strengths in arena for battle neither was designed for. The third acts as a forward gunnery cannonade and protection for the Acclamator's weaker topside armor. "Brilliant," he said. "We think so too, Deputy Director," Captain Chen Yu Hung said, approaching Audenhoen's rear. Walker didn't turn toward the man. He watched in amazement as the 3 Star Destroyers converged into a unilaterally tight pattern. "We will relinquish control of the vessel's helm to the Bruchal for the duration of our flight toward the planet," Hung said in response, closing the distance and taking up residence directly beside the Deputy Director. "It allows us to operate effectively as a single vessel, leaving only our aft exposed." Audenhoen watched on as the proximity involved in the maneuver would have already signaled blaring klaxons in any other ship. "The entirety of your fleet contingent would nullify aft exposure. I see." "It would at that," the captain commented after a few moments. "I'm sorry for my earlier comments, Captain. The immediacy of our situation did not allow me time to consider what had already transpired," Audenhoen said without turning toward the captain. "No apologies necessary, Audie. It is clear the actions of your assistant are weighing on you greatly," Hung responded. Walker didn't register any condescension in the statement and adopted an angered expression. "I didn't see it coming, Chen Yu. I didn't see it," he said through seething lips as he absently tapped a closed fist against the transparisteel. The captain did something Audenhoen did not expect. He placed an open hand over his shoulder. "We never expect deception for those closest to us." Walker turned his head slowly to look upon the man. "Chen Yu, it is my job to expect deception from everyone." Captain Hung turned his head to catch the Deputy Director's glare. "Captain, we have multiple marks at 23.6, closing fast on Executor." Chen Yu Hung's nostrils flared as he stared back in Audenhoen's penetrating gaze. "Alert MATAC and suggest intercept course," he said over his shoulder. "Your formation does little to enable your fighter contingent, Captain," Walker said, returning his gaze to the ventral doors of the ship's topside hangar decks. "Proximity can be deceiving." The same voice. "MATAC has the helm. Target Venator-class Star Destroyer 40-plus seconds out." "This is how we die," Audenhoen said in a whisper, loud enough only for the 2 of them. "I am prepared to die for my empire, Deputy Director," Hung said in a low whisper, gazing toward their prey. "And them," Walker said with a nod over his shoulder, "will follow me to hell if necessary." "Captain, multiple hostiles, multiple hostiles. Executor class, port side, 200,000 clicks out. Picket corvettes are also taking up broadside positions on our port side. Hung gripped his throat loosely. Maytak, tighten our formation and prepare for enemy fighters. We will open fire when in range. Hung, this is a screening diversion. I suggest we maintain heading and follow through with our orders, Bruchal's captain said in response. He's right, Captain, Audenhoen said, his gaze still fixed forward, a closed fist resting on the transparisteel. He turned slightly toward Hung, although that would expose your aft. Accelerate formation, Maytag. Close distance to the Venator and bring us within range of concentrated fire. We will strafe what we can and debark formation at Executor's position, Hung said, his fingers straddling his throat once again. Sir, the portside hostiles? The same alarmed voice asked among his commands. Siento, shut up, Hung said loud enough for his command deck to overhear. Placing yourself purposely between converging fleets. I admire your resolve, Captain, Audenhoen said as he suddenly lost interest in the conversation by a bright green flash closer to the planet. The intensity of the flash continued as he involuntarily brought his arm up to shield his eyes. What the hell was that? He managed to say while profusely rubbing the sight back into his eyes. He turned to the ship's captain, hoping the man could answer the question. However, his expression conveyed the same questions he had rather than any answers. Ship destroyed? Hung asked, rubbing at his own eyes. Green flare, Audenhoen resorted to reason over speculation, which would not be consistent with an exploding warship. That we know of, Hung added. Yes, that we know of. Audenhoen lost himself in his thoughts for a moment before shaking his head. There were too many unknowns to speculate. Hung spun toward his comm officer. Anything from Executor or Relentless? Nothing, sir. Only dead space over comms. They appear to have been compromised, sir. Hung growled to himself as he began to grapple with scenarios. He knew that if both capital ships were damaged, they would be vulnerable to attack or, worse, hijacking. Contrary to their orders, they would both need protection in that event. Where the hell is Side, he thought, knowing his commander would have access to the data necessary to formulate an educated decision. This seems close enough to hell for me, Captain, Audenhoen said, concern stretching across his face. Hung briefly considered the man's words through the cumulative perspective of his earlier comments regarding chaos as a faint transmission buzzed the shipboard comms. Repeated static waves hid the attempt someone was making to contact them. Isolate that signal, clean that garbage out of the feed, Audenhoen said before Hung could. Chen Yu nodded his approval to his comms officer in response to the man's hesitation. A few long seconds passed as the command deck endured ringing feedback loops in ear-splitting tones that made most clap hands over their heads before the officer could clear the message enough to be understood. This is Acting Fleet Commander Captain Denton Arnau of Star Dreadnought Relentless. Are there any Imperial vessels operational? What channel is this feed? Ung asked with dour speculation dripping from his voice. 3.337, encrypted emergency use, came his answer. Hung gave the comms officer a brief thumbs up before toggling at his throat once again. This is Captain Chen Yu Hung of Tagada Tai, Silent Fleet. Do you require assistance, Captain? A quick static wave greeted his question, followed just as quickly by a sharp modulated ping. I would not be utilizing emergency channels otherwise, Captain, a grated, warbly reply followed. We have been compromised by an oscillation discharge and are temporarily incapacitated. I am requesting picket blockades until we can get ourselves and Executor back online to support groundside operations. Copy, Captain. We are en route, Hung returned. Maytak, copy? Loud and clear. The feed buzzed in odd cadences before Arnau's voice emerged again. What is Silent Fleet, Captain? The answer to your query can and will be offered outside the purview of unsecured channels, Captain. Evanside's voice interjected, and Audenhoen noted the slackening of Hung's shoulders in its wake, although he wasn't sure if it was relief or dejection. Shala, you have 3 incoming marks closely grouped. They didn't take our bait, Reece said through the TACnet. Have you deployed fighters? She asked in response. He wasn't sure if he should answer, no, I defied your order, or yes, and already recalled them. That's irrelevant. We're on their 6 and we'll hem them between us. Scans suggest an odd formation. 2 Acclamator-class Star Destroyers deployed perpendicular to an Imperial-class SD at the center. We currently occupy the convicts' only weak point. However, they are accelerating faster than we can. What do you mean it's irrelevant? She responded. Reece blew out his breath. No, I didn't deploy the fighters. It's good that I didn't now, don't you think? There was a heart-sinking moment of uneasy quiet in response. We'll discuss that over dinner later, hun. In the meantime, get your ass up here, she said after letting the moment intensify in his mind. Why does Volman get all the fun missions? Reece thought to himself as he waved for his helmsman's attention. The Weequay finally acknowledged the wave with a crooked smile as he throttled the ship's thruster yoke all the way forward, a second out of sync with the inertia dampener, causing everyone on the ship bridge to jostle backward, scattering data pads and uniform hats in the process. Forward, Captain, the Weequay offered loudly, laughing with youthful enthusiasm, embellished severely by the deranged look on his face. Volman needs to experience this end of the fleet to understand the magnitude of degradation he allows in his vessels. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Reece thought with a sly chuckle under his breath. With a shake of his head, he walked the span of the bridge decking to a hollow image of their ship rotating slowly above its emitter. His flight commander poring over still images of the group formation of enemy vessels on his datapad, seated adjacent. What do you think? As you suggested, Captain, the aft is a weak point, if we can get to it. However, the old lady won't be able to evade those ships, Reece. They're built for bunker busting and low-altitude bombardment. They'll tear her apart if Shala is caught in their path. Launch fighters now? Reece asked. Because I am sure Nock won't return anytime soon. If we do, we'll have to hang back in a loose follow. Damned if we do, damned if we don't, Tellus Var responded, alerting Reece to the obvious with his face turned down in concern. The corners of his lips tugging the strands of his stringy mustache, lowered to frame his boxy chin. My fighters could slow their advance, but as you know, we only have 2 flight-capable B-wings now. If that assembly to turn on us, and Shala is too far out to offer any support, Reece said, tightening his features into a grimace of frustration. Precisely, Captain, Var punctuated. Reece pushed himself back from the hollow table and crossed his arms before his chest in thought, weighing his options as quickly as possible, while knowing his window to act was closing rapidly by the second. Where the hell is Kala? He thought, doing his best to wish her into his presence. He knew the answer to his query lay within the difficulty presented to him, as he could not conceive a solution to collectively save himself and his wife. Reece had no idea who Kondo was or where he had come from, only that Kala had pleaded on his behalf, even at the expense of her safety. He closed his eyes tightly as the mental image of the Iktochi came to the forefront, tears streaming from her eyes in the most compassionate tirade of personal sacrifice he had ever witnessed. How the woman was hysterical over the basic notion that something untoward could or would happen to the man who had only been a part of her life for days replayed itself through his thoughts. He did know what that felt like because he felt it too. Every time they were called upon to fight, he worried uncontrollably over what may or may not happen to the thick-headed warrior he had married. The same thick-headed warrior currently lying between 2 enemy forces. Var, Reece said as he opened his eyes slowly, reaching out again with both arms to support himself on the rim of the holotable. Launch all fighters. Target sublight and ion drives. I want those ships dead in space. All, sir? Tellus Var responded, turning his head toward his captain, his eyes flared wide in surprise. All, Tellus, Reece responded with a severity that surprised him. We're coming, honey, he thought as Tellus rose from his seat and sprinted from the command deck toward the pilot ready rooms. Captain Denton Arnau stared up at the command deck ceiling, blinking through his hazy eyes at sparking conduit and the residual effects of fire-suppressant foams as the image of a man came into view. The man's face was scratched deeply, a thin line of red trailing down his left cheek from a garish wound somewhere in the tangle of hair on his head. The man was shouting something that had yet to register, his eyes wide with worry and concern. Drips of saliva from his soundless spoken volleys sprayed Arnau at intervals as the man reached a hand down to help lift him upright. Arnau stared into his mouth as he repeated the same message. The sound he knew should be accompanying the man's words, lost to the high-pitched ringing, throttling his mind and threatening to steal his sense of balance. As Denton canted forward from his sprawled position with the man's assistance, the hazy view only offered him more of the same. Continuous movement throughout the vast command deck promised to elevate Arnau's discombobulation as subordinates scrambled back and forth, doing their best to restore order to the chaos the bridge had become. He felt the man place a hand on his back and another on the side of his head as he parted the disheveled locks of his hair from his face. The ringing in his ears had yet to terminate, a constant high-pitched whine that was becoming increasingly difficult to concentrate through. Although Denton could make out a few of the words the man was saying in a muffled garble, as he slowly dropped his foggy gaze to the smear of blood on the man's hand. He felt his heart race immediately as a rare sense of panic gripped his core, soothed immediately by his very nature and the calm demeanor of the man assisting him. The clouds of confusion dissipated as Denton Arnau slowly began to understand what he was experiencing. The man assisting him, who had insisted on calling a medic to start bandaging his head, was his very own commander. "Turrets?" Arnau attempted speech, yet was unable to hear his voice. His commander clearly understood what he was experiencing as he brought a finger to his mouth to prompt him to keep quiet. He nodded his acquiescence to the question as he turned his head out and away from Arnau's view. He felt the tug on his skull from the tight wrapping the medic was applying, calling attention back to the bone-jarring whine that threatened to shatter his bones. He dropped both hands to the floor to push himself up to his feet, despite multiple hands from others resisting the intent. "I'm okay," he heard himself say in a dull, muffled expression that sounded garbled in his ears. Arnau looked back into Commander Torritz's eyes when he turned to face him again. He didn't bother with a verbal retort and shook his head in the negative. Arnau could feel his frustration and building contempt threaten to take over his actions as the foggy visage of the chaotic activity around him faded into evident pandemonium. He would not allow the chaos to continue as he let his impulse and instinct drive his actions fully while battling the resistive hands from their perches on his shoulders. He tugged his head free of the medic's actions and grabbed at a twisted handrail broken from its fastening alongside the data console before him. "Get off!" Arnau finally shouted as he batted Torritz's hand away again and pulled himself entirely to his feet. Denton immediately knew it was a mistake as waves of nausea and confounding dizziness tried their best to take his feet from under him again. He grunted deeply as he pushed through the initial waves and focused his vision on a white light inside the data console, doing his best to focus on nothing else for a few moments. He closed his mind to the shouts of his crew, the clanging of metal as parts of the command deck were finishing their descents, from their moorings above or being dragged out of the way by technicians and conscripted stormtroopers alike. He focused solely on the white light as he forced his thoughts through the ringing in his ears, reducing them to mildly irritating pings. Arnau closed his eyes then and forced himself to breathe in and out as deeply and methodically as possible, creating a semblance of clarity and the path he needed to restore order. Arnau opened his eyes, giving the white light one final stare before lifting his head to the chaos. Despite the air scrubbers pulling the smoke from the room at a frantic pace, it billowed along the ceiling of the vacuous bridge, concealing sparks of overloaded power conduits and sources of dripping suppressant foams. He turned slowly from the edges of his peripheral, noting several scorch marks across wall and floor alike, trailing up consoles and covering a wide swath of the data pits recessed into the decking. "Damage," he said finally, shaking free of his ailments to concentrate his energy on the ship's status. Sir, we have multiple hull breaches. Power is minimal throughout the ship. We operate on primary backup only, Commander Torres said, and then said again as Arnau cupped a hand over his ear. Reactors? Arnau responded with immediate concern, pushing past the fogginess circulating again through his throbbing head. Offline and cooling. We are trying to get power routed to them to keep them warm. Crews are on decks 12 through 17 repairing the transfer lines as we speak. Casualties? Denton asked after nodding his approval of the man's preliminary actions. 43 dead and well over 2,000 wounded. Sir, Grand Admiral Tethys has been gravely wounded. She is expected to survive her injuries, but cannot resume her command now. Torres hesitated as his words slowly worked into Arnau's conscience. Sir, you are acting fleet commander. Torres, what happened? Arnau asked, retracing the moments before he had lost consciousness. Your query regarding our adversary's ability to house an oscillator was well-founded. We are currently cleaning up the results of a single discharge. Arnau glanced toward the holotable, hoping the image would proffer some measure of fortune in the wake of the devastation, only to find it non-functional in the dim glow of the red emergency lighting. That's impossible, he thought, his mind slowly becoming his own once again. He knew full well that weaponization of captured energy was only conceptual within certain branch divisions of military intelligence. His thoughts directed him toward paths counterintuitive to their immediate situation. Turrets of the fleet. The commander's eyes sagged as he dipped his chin lower into his chest, his lips shaking as he tried to find the words to answer his acting fleet commander. We were able to restore power to short-range scanners. Sir, Lucidity and Ariane took the discharge head-on. From our calculations, Lucidity was ground zero. Sir, the ships are just gone. He paused as he slowly lifted his chin to face his captain fully. Atomized. Several of our picket and screening vessels were consumed and destroyed in the seismic wake. Although we can scan multiple capital ships, our comms are currently down. Shisa, Barden, Arnau whispered softly into the air between them. Gone, sir. Torres responded, his voice a whisper, bringing his head closer to Denton's. Arnau felt a rare wave of apprehension work its way up from the pit of his churning stomach, his mind returning him thoughts of the dark avenues of treason and deception they had instinctively gone earlier, knowing again that neither would serve his immediate predicament. I want comms up now, he demanded of his commander, suppressing his suspicious emotion and welling anger his thoughts were conjuring. He pushed himself from the data console before him and tested his balance, finding his footing somewhat stable. With a hand brushing over anything useful to grip, he shuffled slowly toward the viewport, limping heavily while favoring his left leg. The far left transparisteel panel was missing. In its place was a shimmering blue magnetic suspension field. He only shook his head as he continued toward the center section of the viewport, formerly consumed by the temple garden. To his left, some distance away, he could see Executor, canted heavily to her port side. He could not visually ascertain any damage the ship may have sustained. The only other body to view was the orange, red, and yellow swirls of the planet they were orbiting. This better be worth the price, he mumbled to himself, as he heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. Sir, comms are up. We can only manage short range now, but it should suffice to encompass the operational area. Emergency encryption on 3.337. Arnau tapped at his earbead, listening attentively as it chirped in a squelched reply. Then it beeped twice as it activated fully. This is Acting Fleet Commander Captain Denton Arnau, Star Dreadnought Relentless. Are there any Imperial vessels operational? Several long seconds passed as the transmission buzzed in a light static with no response. Arnau felt his grip on hope begin to dwindle, just before the static gave way to several chirps, followed by open air. This is Captain Chenyu Hung of Tagada Tai, Silent Fleet. Do you require assistance, Captain? I would not be utilizing emergency channels otherwise, Captain, Arnau replied as delicately as his frustration allowed. We have been compromised by an oscillation discharge and are temporarily incapacitated. I am requesting picket blockades until we can get ourselves and the Executor back online to support groundside operations. He finished, his attention immediately focused on the captain's fleet designation. His mind wandered back to those dark avenues of deception, uncovering a non-conventional severity that caused another wave of apprehension. Copy. Captain, we are en route, the captain replied. Arnau would not be denied at least some answers. What is Silent Fleet, Captain? His feed returned nothing but grains of static and pings of interference before silencing again. The answer to your query can and will be offered outside the purview of unsecured channels, Captain. Another voice answered, one he had never heard before. The finality within the responder's tone affirmed there would be no further conversation on the topic, yet he knew he was far from done inquiring. Denton would find the answers his sanity required, one way or another.